I mean, I thought I might be winking at me because I have something in my contact. So I do it. I'm not doing it as much as I'm probably intending to. Mad Dog Moody Eye. Oh. I tweeted you, and then I just retweeted you. Hello. Yeah. And now famous. Should I wait or should I go? I like starting on time, but there's a guy in charge of my microphone. I don't know if I wait for him or not. So I'm just going to go ahead and introduce ourselves. Okay. Hello, my name is Noreen Nassim Rodriguez. I am a professor at Iowa State University. I am relatively new to Iowa, so I might throw in a y'all here or there. I am from the great state of Texas. And I want to introduce you to my research assistant, Riley Drake. Hello. Riley's a member of the doctoral program at Iowa State, and we're excited to present together for the first time. We'll be talking about Iowa national immigration from the last century, going beyond Ellis Island. So basically, the simple task of going over 100 in about 45 minutes, and then there's folks that hopefully will have a little bit of time for you to talk about. There's a lot covering, obviously. So just realize that I have a ton of resources for you. At the end of the slideshow, I'm going to do a URL for it. There's also a link in the final slide to our resources, which I believe are also going to be shared by ICSS. Immediate access to them. In the resource folder, tons of resources listed both by grade level and by ethnic group, as well as some general history related to immigration and information about immigration laws. And it's for you. And then there's also folders with additional documents, research-based articles, and other stuff, teacher guides, etc., about some of the different things we're going to be stuff that you'll get to see at the end. As a quick thing to do, what is beyond Ellis? Then after Ellis Island closed, it was no longer as active as it had been previously. How immigration changed in Iowa in the last century, really thinking about some of those key laws and groups that would be important for you to teach about that time period. And then lastly, like I said, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to explore some resources and even get together in some small groups so you can talk about what you're doing, what you're looking to change or improve upon. So in terms of thinking about immigration in the classroom, can I just how many elementary people do we have in the room? Is everyone else secondary? Raise your hand if you're a secondary teacher. Okay, I figured we would have a little bit of an imbalance, but right now, what is typically covered, regardless of whether or not you're elementary or secondary? What's you think of immigration in the classroom? Silent, yeah. Push and pull factors, definitely. Some folks are starting to add in weights. Different groups of okay, laws and quotas. It's typically when we have these conversations. What groups? Europeans. For Japanese, Chinese, Mexico, Philippines. I'll teach you about the Philippines. I'm half Filipino. You kids think about my I did not learn about it when I was in school. I'm glad people are learning about it now. Any other groups that are included? Groups that we have listed. What's not being?
Everybody else.
So that's a lot of other. And then we talk Mexican immigration. Are we relegating that to a particular time frame, or are we thinking about Mexican immigration in the last years? About immigration, is it relegated with it across? So I'm hoping you're all here because you have some ideas as to why teaching beyond Ellis Island matters. Ellis Island is a big deal. There's a reason that people tend to focus on it so heavily, particularly at the elementary level. 12 million immigrants passed through its doors in the over 60 years that it was open, but they were mostly from Western and Southern Europe. And if you click on that link, there's a sheet that'll actually go through all the years and show you the top 5 groups that passed through Ellis Island each of those years. However, even though it was open for a really long period of time, its peak years were from 1900 to 1914. From 1925 to 1950, only 2.3 Ellis Island during that entire time. That's about 30 years. I have a ton of examples of resources that are used heavily in elementary classrooms to teach about this stuff. I've used a lot of these books myself. Elementary teacher in Texas before I went through grad school and came to Iowa State. Now, in elementary, people love using scholastic.com. This is what their primary site on immigration looks like. This is the contemporary stuff. So it shows us the total number of immigrants by decade to the United States between 1820 to 2010. There. If we think about when Ellis closed, that puts us about here. So then we're not learning about all of that. Another section of this website represents this data a little bit differently, 50-year periods. And there's a really stark difference once we start looking at what happened after 1920. But if we're not teaching past Ellis Island, we're not necessarily explaining why all of a sudden we see countries and continents represented that were never there before. Someone mentioned Angel Island. Oftentimes, we focus only on Ellis Island. We're not recognizing that Angel Island was the primary port of immigration for people not just from Asia, but also from Central and South America, from Australia, from Russia. So, how did immigration change in the last century? And this is where I'm going to start talking really fast, because there's a whole lot to go through. But again, there's additional resources and tons of detailed information in the Google folder for you. So, when we think about major waves of American immigration, people categorize them differently. I'm using the 4 waves designated by Wrong and Preissel. You might find 3 waves in the textbooks that you use. Totally recognize that this varies based on who you're citing. But if we think about Wrong and Preissel's designations, between 1820 to 2010, we see the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th waves of immigration. What do we notice about the difference between the 3rd wave and the 4th wave? Looking at that key that's at the top. Dark blue is Europe, light blue is Asia, green is Americas, orange is Africa.
Well, that's European immigrant.
It's almost like I planted you there, Jenny. No, it's good. It's fine. Fewer European immigrants, so then where are more immigrants coming from? The Americas, Asia, Africa. So it's important to recognize that even though the Constitution promises equality for all, as social studies folks, you know that that actually hasn't been our history. And when we think about both immigration law and paths to citizenship that are available, they have typically been discriminatory on at least one of the 3 following categories, if not a combination: race, class, and gender. Starting with the 1790 Nationality Act, which only gave a possibility for citizenship to free white persons. The 14th Amendment added African Americans to that. And after that, we see a series of laws, in terms of scope, that affected people differently, limiting them from entry. So usually I think one of the things that's biggest in terms of this discussion, even at the elementary level, is the conversation around the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, right? So thinking about how that was the first law that actually identified a group of people by nationality as ineligible for citizenship, and then that was applied to everyone else that tried to come from Asia. In 1917, we see the creation of and the introduction of literacy to reduce European immigration, particularly from the East and the South. With this same Immigration Act, they also included a head tax for Mexican immigrants that hadn't been in place before, so it was $8 per person, and and I have a picture on the next slide of what I'm about to talk about here. In 1924, they introduced an immigration act known as the Reed-Johnson Act that implemented a national origins quota. So, even if you were able to find a way to come to the United States, for example, from Asia, the Asiatic Barred Zone prohibited almost everyone from Asia, but it still allowed for immigration from the Philippines and from Japan. The national origins quota made sure that not too many people could come from those places. So it was highly to come. And so I know this is hard to see, but we see a lot of countries that have 100 as their quota. And it's important to recognize that this quota wasn't just about the country that you're leaving to come to the United States, it's about ancestry. So if you were a Chinese person living in Australia, when you submitted your paperwork, you would be considered Chinese, and you would fill part of the Chinese quota because of your ancestry. It didn't matter that you were coming from Australia. This guided immigration policy until 1965. There were some changes that were made, but for the most part, what was established in 1924 carried through the 60s. This is a really cool graphic that I just wanted to share, and I figured this was a good place to throw it in. If you click on the link, you can hover over any portion of this graphic, and it will show you the year and the number of immigrants from each of these countries over time. Super cool. Just by looking at the image from afar, if I superimpose immigration again, we see that explosion. In this last part where it really blooms, there's so many different colors. And are we really teaching our students about all of those different groups and how they were able to suddenly access immigration at levels that were completely unprecedented before? So in 1965, the Hart-Celler Act is passed, and this is pretty much what continues to set the stage for our current immigration policy. The primary principles of this immigration law were family reunification, and non-quota immigrants attached to that were spouses, minor children, and parents. 20% of the immigration designations were allotted for employment, which then meant that people who were skilled, highly educated laborers were often able to access immigration in a way they never could before. And then lastly, a certain percentage was allotted for refugees. At this point, each country received the same numeric cap on immigration. So if we go back to that quota, we see all these different countries that have 100. It was suddenly equalized. For the first time in 1965, the gates of America were opened to people from the Americas, from Asia, from Africa, in ways that they never had been before. However, because of the preferences for employment, this act did not provide for unskilled workers that worked in fields like agriculture, construction, domestic service. And so that kind of fostered this growing population of unauthorized immigrants who had no legal means for entry. And then often they became kind of caught in a hard space where they couldn't then become citizens. They didn't have access to this. This is drawing from the work of Dr. Madeline Hsu at the University of Texas at Austin, and I have an outline that she's written up about all of the major immigration laws, and those are in your folder. So, jumping from the nation to the state. I'm doing it all the time. All right. So, thinking about immigration to Iowa in the last century, let's check out that key really quick at the top. Shades of green are from Canada. The deeper the shade, the higher concentrated that population is. Purple is Western Europe. Orange is Asia and the Middle East. Red is Latin America. And blue is Russia and Eastern Europe. So I'm going to jump every 40 years. This is starting at 1880. The colors represent the largest concentrations of foreign-born groups in each county. And I don't think your colors are showing up as well as mine are, but can you tell what groups are making up the largest percentages of foreign-born in Iowa? Purple, which is Western Europe. This is really not coming out well. That's blue. So Russia and mostly Eastern Europe. Okay, this is 1880. Let's jump 40 years to 1920. Same two groups? Western Europe, Eastern Europe, 40 more years, 1960. It's still purple and blue, so it's still Western and Eastern Europe, but fewer concentrations of foreign-born. And this is 2000. What has happened? A lot of immigration from Latin America and Asia. There's still a few pockets throughout the state that are light blue. That's still that Eastern European and Russian immigration. So one of the earliest groups to immigrate to Iowa in substantive numbers were Mexicans. They started coming to Iowa as early as the 1840s, and most of them were seasonal laborers. So they came, worked in the field, worked on temporary construction projects for the railroad, and then either went back home or moved on to other places. In the time period between 1900 and 1930, about 100,000 Mexicans came to the Midwest. You have to realize that between that time period, you had the last decade of Porfirio Diaz's dictatorship, followed immediately by the Mexican Revolution. So a lot of Mexicans were just leaving from central Mexico in particular. Weren't subjected to a lot of the immigration laws that were excluding everybody else. So they were able to come to the United States with no problem, and they fulfilled labor shortages that were happening as a result of World War I. However, near the end of that time period is the Great Depression. So, at the same time as the Great Depression, Mexican repatriation occurred, which basically decimated populations of Mexican Americans throughout the Southwest. In Iowa, it wasn't as big of a deal, and not as many Mexicans went back to Mexico during that time period. And so, we can see here from the table that there's not a ton of Mexicans that were living in the Midwest, and particularly Iowa at this time. A lot of the ones that were here stayed. And then we see starting in 2000, that number starts growing exponentially. Because there were generations that stayed, that had families, that realized that they were facing a lot of racism and discrimination, they started to organize, and this is not the purpose of today's presentation, so I'm not going to spend any time here, but all of these primary sources are from the Migration is Beautiful archive at the University of Iowa, and they really have done a wonderful job of telling this rich history of activism and organization, particularly among the labor force, so I highly recommend that you check that out. Moving on to broader Latinx immigration, so we know that Mexican Americans have been in Iowa since the 1880s. Other groups of Latinx immigrants started coming much more recently. So during World War II, there was a small contingent of Puerto Ricans that came to Iowa during World War II to work in the Women's Army Corps, which was stationed in Fort Des Moines. And then in the last few decades, we've seen more growth in Central American immigration. And those immigrants are largely drawn by processing industries, a lot of the factories around the state. Because they're working in factories, because oftentimes they're coming with little education, they work in the lowest wage sectors of the economy. If we think about the 2016 statistics for this group, it's the largest non-white group in Iowa, 8% of Iowa's foreign-born population. They're most concentrated in Polk County, but as you all know, Latinx immigrants are found all over the state. Again, this is not the purpose of my lecture, but if you want to dive deeply into Latinx immigration, it's important to think about the post-Swivl rate of 2008. Is there anyone that would like to summarize this for me so I don't have to read the slide? I'm new to Iowa. I'm assuming a lot of y'all know this and were around when this was making headlines. I'm in a room of teachers and no one wants to give a quick summary.
Swivl had a new packing plant. The ice came in and separated families, and pretty much destroyed this stuff. With families being left, kids being left, the separation, it was devastating for post-Swivl and where we settled.
And it sparked a lot of really important conversations about immigration, undocumented immigration, how highly it's used in this state in particular, but also in other Midwestern states. It was a kosher meat packing plant, and very recently they were back in the news because the one member of the actual factory that was convicted, not for the 9,000 child labor violations that were brought against him, but of bank fraud. He served 8 years out of his 27-year sentence, but was released, and President Trump commuted his sentence just last year. So that was in the news fairly recently. There are 2 documentaries that are out about this. Iowa State is doing a screening of the one that came out this summer called America First. So if you want to If you're interested in seeing that screening, if you're up in Ames, please let me know. Lots of books have been published about this, so there's tons of stuff out there. I just want to make sure that since we're talking about Latinx immigration, this is an important event to think about discussing with your students. Jumping to the next largest group of immigrants to Iowa, Asian Americans comprise 2.5% of the state's population, and that number has been growing rapidly. Across the country, Asian Americans are the fastest growing racial group. We've actually outpaced Latinx immigration. With Asian American immigrants, it's really important to recognize that there is a wide range of backgrounds and diversity, not just in terms of religion and languages spoken, but also in terms of their means of coming to Iowa. There are some that are refugees, there are some that are highly educated to work in West Des Moines at John Deere in the IT and engineering departments, where they are able to come on H-1B visas versus the folks that are able to come as designated refugees. India is the second leading country of birth for Iowa's foreign-born after Mexico, followed by China, Burma, Vietnam, and the Philippines. And the group with the biggest history here, not a recent immigrants, but actually more well-established now in their second and third generations, are the Thai Dam, and they have a really interesting story that we're going to share in just a little bit. I also want to draw your attention to Pacific Islanders in Iowa. And this is something, as a scholar of Asian and Pacific Islanders, really, really fascinating. I don't have a ton of answers for you about this, but I do want to put it on your radar. So there's only about 3,500 Pacific Islanders in Iowa, but the reason why they're here is pretty interesting. So between 1946 to 1962, the United States was doing nuclear testing in around the Bikini Atoll and in several other areas in the Pacific. We poisoned the water. A lot of people got really sick. And so as a result, the United States went to the United Nations and created this Compact of Free Association, which allows people who live in the Federated States of Micronesia, Palau, and the Marshall Islands to come to the United States and work. They don't have to apply for visas. They're able to come and go as they please through this agreement. However, they're not able to receive services. For whatever reason, and I still haven't determined this reason, hopefully next year at ICSS I will be back and I'll be able to tell you more. There are large, and when I say large, I mean like 300 people, large concentrations of Pacific Islanders in Dubuque and in Storm Lake. And if you know anything else about this story, please come talk to me. I'm trying to get to the bottom of this. The largest concentrations of Marshallese in the country are actually in Arkansas and in Hawaii. Number 3 is Iowa. So it's fascinating to me. This is a picture of Irene Ernest. She's in the Dubuque community, and they actually created a sculpture of her in front of the Dubuque Museum of Art. So it's a fascinating history. It's something that actually comes up a lot more in science in terms of healthcare because they're not eligible to receive Medicaid. There's a lot of concerns about how to treat them and their health. But this is just a super interesting kind of fun fact, new and growing population in Iowa that may not be on your radar just yet. Okay, a couple more things and then Riley's going to take over. For some of these groups that follow, we want to really give them an opportunity to describe their own stories, so we're going to play a few short videos for you.
Admiration continues to pour into beloved former Iowa Governor Robert Ray, who passed at the age of 89. Immense impact Ray had on Iowa's immigrants. During the Vietnam War, Governor Ray welcomed the refugees from Asian countries. And tonight we met 2 different families who prayed for former Governor.
Just the immigrants you met say they don't know where they would be today. Governor Ray by the around.
The stories these immigrants had always passing and humanitarian response during the mid-1970s is remarkable. There's one refugee from Vietnam and one from Laos who were both displaced after the Vietnam War, but Governor Ray welcomed them here to Des Moines with open arms.
And the Constitution of the state of Iowa.
Beloved Governor Robert D. Ray was known for his visionary leadership. During his 5 terms that impacted the entire state.
I will be forever grateful for the opportunity to have served and led Iowa during these exciting times.
He's especially known for inviting immigrants into the hostile state after the Vietnam War.
In 1975, the communist come again, and in Southside, that's why we go here. Because we don't like the communist no good.
Larry Stuber is a military veteran, and his wife Nat is a Vietnamese refugee. They are forever grateful to Governor Ray, because if he hadn't opened Iowa's borders, they may not have ever met.
He's a good man. I knew Bob Ray personally, and
and make a new life in Des Moines.
They teach us the culture, the language, how to walk in this country.
Thomas is proof that Mr. Ray made the right choice in fighting for people of different backgrounds.
It's our home, Iowa. Iowa is our home. We are Iowa now.
The entire immigrant community feeling the loss of Governor Ray's passing, but remembering him for his incredible influence.
Yeah, he was a politician, but he was a good politician, and he did a lot of good for a lot of people.
There is a big community of people from Southeast Asia that now call Iowa home, and that's all thanks to the late governor. They say they will miss him tremendously, but his legacy will live on. Reporting live in Des Moines, Brenda Carmen, Local 5.
What really struck us about the community, they wrote all 50 governors at the time, pleading and just pleading, please don't separate us. Basically to say, all we have left is each other. And I think at that time, from my understanding, he was going to governor to respond to Wayne Sanders said, well, the world will take you as one community, as one family. You'll hear the term a lot, hero, forefather, savior, because to so many of us, we know it takes many, many people in villages to make things work, but sometimes one individual does truly make a difference. If it wasn't for his commitment to that, and especially his belief and knowing in his heart that he's doing the right thing and not letting the naysayers get in the way, and having that courage, I think that, you think of today's times and back then, how challenging or difficult that would have been. And I'm sure he had a million things, obstacles or reasons to not to do this. It would have been so much easier, but it wasn't. He was a hero in our eyes because he had the courage and the commitment to do what he felt was truly honorable and the right thing to do, to save thousands of lives.
So Iowa was the first and remains the only state to create its own state-sponsored refugee resettlement program. So that's a huge part of Iowa's history and makes it really unique. And then we're going to go through a few more different groups of refugee arrivals.
Okay, so in the graph on the left-hand side, that the refugee arrivals have been steadily increasing since 2012 up to about 2016. And on the right-hand side, you can see in 2016, the refugees by nationality, the Democratic Republic of Congo had about the highest amount of refugees with 26% in Iowa. Except for in 2018, the U.S. is now on pace to resettle the fewest number of refugees in over 40 years. And that is due largely to, in January 2017, when President Donald Trump slashed the refugee resettlement quota by more than half and issued an executive order banning entry to nationals of half a dozen countries. 2 of those are included on the bottom of the screen. You can see on the left-hand side, the Sudan, which we'll be talking more about in just a minute, has resettled 20 refugees. That's an 83% decrease since the first 3 months of 2016. And the Democratic Republic of Congo has resettled about 1,400 refugees. That's about a 39% decrease since the first 3 months of 2016. And Africa, which, as we all already know, is a continent, and it is home to 49 countries, the largest of which is the Sudan, which is about 4 times the size of Texas. And Africa has the world's largest refugee population. Only has about a fifth of the world's population, but more than half of the world's refugees. And the reason for this is very complex. If you click on the link that says European Divide and Rural Methods of Government, that can tell you the story in more detail. But basically what happened was Europeans colonized the Sudan, just like they did lots of other African countries, and baited indigenous groups against each other, creating that conflict which has sustained and continues to this day.
There have been peace talks. The credibility of those peace talks is largely dependent on whether or not those warring leaders can come together and sustain what they've agreed to in writing. Most of the Sudanese refugees that are resettling in Iowa are newer people who are Christians from South Sudan. It's important that we understand the refugee status of Sudanese refugees. They are in crisis. They can no longer live in the Sudan. These are some examples of Sudanese refugees who are currently living in Iowa. On the left-hand side, you can see a family. This was the first Sudanese refugee family to come to Carroll, Iowa, and the second black family in town, which speaks to one of the challenges Sudanese refugees face. Being black in predominantly white communities is in and of itself a challenge, but particularly for students who are coming into schools who are identifying as African or Sudanese and then lumped in with the black students or the African American students creates this really complex confusion where they're not quite sure, who am I? What is my racial identity? So that's a challenge for children and families. Other challenges include hostility to differences. As people don't quite understand cultural traditions, there's xenophobia that results. We're uncertain about what you mean or what you're doing or why you're here. Language barriers. While many Sudanese refugees speak English, it's one of the primary languages, not all do. The other language that is primarily spoken is Arabic, but there are over 114 indigenous languages that are spoken. There's also a lack of mental health services to overcome trauma, which, as we know in Iowa, is an issue in rural areas all over the place. But for the specific types of trauma that a lot of the Sudanese refugees have experienced, there's not the care that is so desperately needed to be provided to children, adults, people who have experienced such atrocities. This is a quote. As Dr. Rodriguez pointed out, we want to make sure that we are using the words of people who have actually experienced resettling in Iowa and in the United States. So this particular quote says, "I started struggling in life. I lived a strange life I never lived before," speaking of this refugee's experience living in Iowa City. There are refugees who are adjusting to life in Iowa. We want to make sure that we point those out. Ding Tier, the family on the right-hand side, at a Sudanese forum in Des Moines, Iowa, when asked, "Tell me about yourself," said, "I am a Sudanese American," which speaks to the bicultural identity that he has developed. He's seeing himself still as Sudanese, very much a part of who he is, but also American. And so I think it's important a lot of times because there's always this conflict or this idea that, well, people are coming here and they should be American or they should be this way. The idea that this is an example of a person who's embracing this part of his identity, a very rich part of who he is, as well as adopting this other new part of his identity is cool to see. Two other examples of refugees who are thriving in Iowa are Clementine Masini and Mazahir Saleh. Clementine Masini was a refugee on the left-hand side from Rwanda who started the Bright Move Network, which supports new immigrants and refugees as they come into Iowa. Mazahir Saleh was an immigrant from the Sudan and is a founder of the Center for Worker Justice in Eastern Iowa. And she was elected in 2017 to the Iowa City Council as the first Sudanese American woman to hold elected office in the United States. Those are both videos, so you can go back and watch them later if you'd like. It is important to understand, though, that regardless of how well adjusted the refugees in Iowa are, they are still living in a state of almost constant fear based on the current legislation that's been passed. I'm going to play a short clip for you, and you'll hear from Helen Morgan, a Togo refugee that's referenced at the bottom, as she speaks to opening up her arms to God as the only thing left that she can do.
This is Refugee Resource Center. We're open every Wednesday night from 6 to 8. We help with direct client services to refugees or other immigrants that need help with problems within the community. Okay. Donald Trump did the executive order. There's a lot of fear in refugees. They've expressed, I've gotten phone calls asking if they should leave their house, if they should wear their traditional clothing. They are afraid of being sent back to war-torn countries. I've seen people who are here legally with green cards needing to get citizenship paperwork filed right away because they're afraid that they will be sent back to the countries they came from.
I came to the United States 5 years ago from Sudan. I've been living in Des Moines for the past 5 years. I am not a citizen, so I'm hoping to become one soon. That's why I'm doing this work. I'm volunteering because I want to help people. And because of our current president, it kind of worries me that he is the president now based on all the stuff he says about immigrants and refugees. So I mean, him being a president kind of worries me. So wanting me to like get my citizenship faster.
If the law requires it, are you willing to bear arms on behalf of the United States?
My hope is that Donald Trump will start listening to people in the United States of America and realize that immigration is the foundation that this country is built on, that it needs to continue, and we can't be afraid of people who are different from us or persecute and deny people access based on their religion.
We don't know what may come next. So we're looking up to God. Whatever comes, we take it.
Another group that we want to draw your attention to is from former Yugoslavia Bosnian refugees who resettled in the 1990s as war refugees. They were also granted legal permission by the United States government to resettle throughout the country, but are considered secondary migrants to Iowa because they settled in other locations in the United States before permanently settling in Iowa. They were drawn to Iowa by jobs in meatpacking and agricultural processing industries, as well as Iowa's peaceful, family-oriented lifestyle. What's really unique and fascinating about the Bosnian refugee population is that in Bosnia, many of them were working in very highly paid, considered high-level jobs and positions. But through the process of coming to the United States, they lost credentialing paperwork. The processes here in the United States are different, so they've had to take some of these lower-level positions where they're not being paid nearly as much as they were in Bosnia. Many Bosnians become very resentful of the idea that we came here for better jobs. That's just simply not the case. Again, we're going to use the words of a Bosnian, Arnisa, to talk about why Bosnians are in Iowa. Oh, and I already had it pulled up, so we can go back here.
Has just celebrated the 4th of July. Des Moines' Bosnian community is preparing for the 11th of July. It's the day the war in Bosnia came to a horrifying climax in 1995. Andy Fales has the story.
The video is repugnant but also invaluable.
It's a smoking gun.
General Ratko Mladic on July 10, 1995, preparing his army for Europe's worst genocide since the Holocaust.
You will see Mladic when he was there, you will see those people alive.
The next day, Mladic's troops would begin a massacre of over 8,000 Bosnian men and boys who'd sought sanctuary in Srebrenica. The video is all there.
The Bosnian community has a problem with talking about it because it is something that you don't want to think about.
20 years later, Iowa's Bosnian community forces itself to look, if not at the video, then at least to the stories of the worst chapter in its history, for the sake of future generations.
It is hard, but ultimately it will help them understand.
This will also be a chance for the community, some 15,000 strong, to tell its own coming to America story.
I think it's important for our neighbors to know something about us, to kind of understand, hey, this is why we're here.
Their lives are not here in Iowa, but July 11th is part of their history and of their obligation to the world.
It's the biggest tragedy in Europe since World War II, and it's something that we as Bosnians and Bosniaks cannot let it happen again.
In Des Moines, Andy Fales, Channel 13 News.
The ceremony to remember Srebrenica.
So considering what the Bosnian community has experienced and knowing that many of them are Muslims, a challenge that they experience uniquely is Islamophobia. There is an Islamic and Educational Center in Des Moines, Iowa, where the Imam Niyaz has spoken and said, this is our embassy, this is our community connection to Bosnia. They know, he's referring to people who have attacked the community for being Muslim, that we are not aggressive. If you know the Quran, you know it is not preaching violence. If they read one page, they should ask us, what is the message? So now what we'd like to invite you to do is check out some resources. And the first thing that we have available for you is teaching Iowa immigration. So one website that we want to particularly point out is the first, Immigration in Iowa, Iowa Pathways by IPTV. You can come to this website and it's very easy to navigate. You can look up groups by name. If you're interested in learning about new Iowans, some of whom we've talked about today, most of whom we've talked about today, you can go there and check that out. I know someone mentioned push and pull factors earlier, so you can go and take a look at that. We also would like to draw your attention to this next slide, which is teaching national immigration. I'm going to let Dr. Rodriguez talk about a forthcoming website that's going to be really instrumental, hopefully, in guiding how you teach national immigration.
So I had really hoped that it would be ready by today. It is not quite ready yet, but it will be hopefully in the next month or two. I think the projected date is by the NCSS conference at the end of November. But it's immigrationhistory.org. They have a ton of information about immigration laws, but again, it's not quite ready, so there's some text that's kind of clunky and lots of code that needs to be cleaned up. But one of the things that will be on there are some really detailed lesson plans, and what they've basically done is collected suggestions and content from immigration researchers from across the country and paired with teachers to develop these lesson plans. So for example, in one of the lessons, they would have this graphic here and you would distribute different immigration laws to small groups of students, and they would fill out this graphic organizer to identify the big ideas about that piece of legislation, who that legislation includes and who it excludes, find some primary sources about it, and collect some quotes about that particular piece of legislation. So there's going to be some great stuff there. It's just not ready yet. And then there's a few others there that are also excellent for a wide range of topics related to immigration. So to access all of the stuff, if you follow this tiny URL, that will take you to this slideshow, which is embedded with videos and links throughout. And then that will also give you that link to the resource folder that has a ton of stuff that I'll open up in a second once everyone has the tiny URL. I do want to mention particularly for the elementary folks who are in the room. At Iowa State, we have our undergraduate social studies method students create what we call the unit plan challenge, where they're supposed to look at the Iowa Core Standards. And basically, we ask real teachers like yourselves to commission units for our students to design based on the standards of your choice. So this semester, we're already partnering with a teacher in Southeast Polk, and she is having students design lessons around immigration, and one group is doing parent-child separations at the U.S. and Mexico border. One group is investigating the difference between legal and illegal immigration. Another group is creating lesson plans around refugees. So if you're interested in potentially receiving those lesson plans and or being one of our commissioning teachers, I'm going to pass around this paper. Please sign up. We're always looking for teachers across the state to work with. If you just want to get the lessons, I'm happy to send you all their stuff. They create their lesson plans on a website, and that has all of their stuff on it. So you can take your ideas, turn it into whatever works for you, or directly download those lesson plans that they'll be posting. So easy way to get more materials, particularly at the elementary level, but I'm sure there may be some stuff there that might be useful to second grade folks. So real quick, if you click on that resource folder, you have access to our slideshow. There is a list of recommended resources. This is that overview of legislation from Dr. Hsu. And then there's additional resources about Angel Island and Iowa immigration specifically. And let me just show you real quick what this recommended resources page looks like. There's some redundancy between this and what was embedded in the slideshow, but we just want to make sure that you have access to all the stuff. So tons of stuff, general information about immigration laws and flows, Iowa-specific stuff, followed by elementary resources, secondary stuff, all levels, and then by ethno-racial group. And at the end, primary sources galore. Lots of resources there for you. If you have something that you don't see listed that you think would be helpful to others, please let me know and we can add it. And at this front table, we also have a wide selection of picture books that would be appropriate for both elementary and secondary. I have everything from cartoon histories of Latinos in the United States and graphic novels that would absolutely be appropriate in a high school classroom, this type of stuff, to middle school level reading and picture books about basic things like what is a refugee. So your secondary students, you cover one of these in a day and you can cover a lot. So please feel free to look at everything and let us know if you have any questions. Thank you. Just going to turn 5. Yeah. Maybe 10 minutes. It's more than half. Yeah.
Do you have a good resource for, I'm in 3rd grade, and so teaching the citizenship process, and then also like visa, green card, like the different ways you can live here?
I have a bunch of stuff I can send you. I can give you my card and email me directly. Okay. Or if you want to sign up on the page and just make a little asterisk about the citizenship stuff, I'll make sure you get it.
On the one you're just passing out?
Okay. But if you don't hear from me from that, just email me.
Hi. I'm with IPTV and work on Iowa Pathways, so thank you so
I
much.
just emailed you all.
Including that.
Asking how I can get my hands on, what is it called? A Promise Called Iowa.
I was going to say, do you need a Promise Called Iowa?
I do need a Promise Called Iowa.
We're in the process of removing the model right now, so we are all displaced from all of our normal supplies. So it might be a little while before we can get it, but there are a couple others that I thought of that I think would be good, so I can put my hands on them. I don't know who you email, but I'll figure it out.
I emailed whatever the email was at the bottom of the website.
Yeah, perfect. So I'll see what I can get for you.
Yeah.
So I'm from Iowa State as well.
Oh, great.
So fantastic. So I'm glad to see that you're in with it.
It's such a great resource. I love it.
Yeah, we're really excited. We're glad to be continuing to add stuff for it.
Yeah.
So
I'm glad you saw it. Yes, please do.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi.
Hi.
My daughter teaches 1st grade at a pretty diverse school on the east side. Any chance that they give like a list of the books that are over there or something?
Everyone asks me this question. Yes. I have one of those problems where I buy books so often that the list is never current. But I do have a list. So if you want to email me, I can get you a starter list.
Okay, great.
And one thing I will suggest is we have some colleagues that also work in elementary schools across the state, and because I know, books are expensive, but we were just talking to the AEAs up here. If you give the book list to your daughter and she sends it to the AEA, they have lending libraries. So even if she doesn't have access to those books in her school library or at the public library, she can get it through them.
Okay, thank you. Filipinos. I was out doing a workshop in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh,
where I found out Japanese, Chinese, Filipinos, and then of course the great boycott was Cesar Chavez and Mexican Americans and Filipinos.
Started by the Filipinos. They convinced us of Chavez, yes.
That was a biggie.
I'm so glad you're including that.
Yeah. Thank you for your session. It was good. Thank you. I had on time presenting one, so I didn't get the list to come by. So I emailed you already about the immigration lessons.
Okay, yes. I will send those your way as soon as they're ready.
Possibly commissioning. I'm not actually sure what that all means, but I teach in Waterloo.
You just say, hey, I need stuff about these standards. Yeah. And then I hand that to my students. You tell us what you want.
Oh, you guys write them.
I don't write them. My undergrads write them.
Really?
But to whatever specifications you have.
Okay. Awesome.
So yeah, it's a good challenge for them. So you let them know what you want.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Your dissertation was on
It was on Asian American elementary teachers teaching Asian American history.
Okay. And it was out of the University of Texas. And you said something about the Marshallese settling in a truck, or settling in Dubuque.
In Dubuque,
I was in Palau Island, Indonesia.
Are you involved with the Sudan refugees at all?
I believe they've been coming in the last
Sudan
20
refugees,
years.
are you involved at all in Iowa City
20
or
years.
So I worked in an elementary school for a long period of time, and so many of the Sudanese refugees' families were people who I knew pretty well. Yes.
Just because
but in terms of like organizations and groups like that, I haven't been involved. Is that something that you're interested in?
Well, we do Long Walk to Water.
Oh, yes.
I would love to have an Iowan, Sudanese, Iowan American come and talk to the kids.
Oh, wow.
I just think that would be great, but I don't have a tie. We're in northeast Iowa. We don't have a...
Oh, sure.
We're close to Postville. I just thought, gosh, to get that.
What town specifically?
Owine. So Cedar Rapids, Waterloo.
I'm not sure.
I wrote down a couple of the different resource names that you were sharing.
But there is a group, a Sudanese American group, and I'm sure if you email and ask if there would be someone who's willing to, they're community leaders. There are several that are living in Des Moines, but then others who are kind of spread out throughout Iowa. And I bet they would love to send someone to come and talk about their own experience.
And we do Skype and face.
Yeah. Sure.
It just isn't the same.
I get it. Yep, I get that.
You know, we've gone all over the world talking with people that actually have someone come and either share their story or their parents' story.
I'm trying to think of what it is exactly. What I'm thinking of. The website.
If I Google it, I should be able to find it.
I know it should be included in the.
It might be a national, but then I could get down to the Iowa.
You could, but there is. Website. I want to make sure.
Do you know anyone from Micronesia?
Can I put a star by my name and if you find something?
Absolutely, yes.
I'm like, I need to.
I know people
the Iowa International Center.
I know.
I think I wrote that down.
Okay, but if I find anything specifically, I will make sure.
That's what this starts.
You are Carla. Okay, yeah, I will definitely pass along anything that I
Water
find.
is our
I love that book. You're a refuge. Okay, I have it at home. I have it, and I'm so excited to read it. But we have the reading in my program right now.
It
so
is
intensive.
right now the World Read Aloud book.
Oh wow!
And I'm not doing it in class right now.
Yeah.
But World Read Aloud book, I don't know if you're aware, that's national, international. Teachers around the world are putting resources together and then connecting their classes through FaceTime. And
that is so
we did that with Long Walk to Water a while ago. And
that's so cool.
An awesome program. But refugee is
it's like literally on my list in my stack, just waiting.
Move it up. Because it's a fast read.
Oh, okay.
And just plan a night where there's nothing else going on
to do,
and you'll get it done in 2 nights.
Out. Yeah. Thank you,
or
Carla,
one night
for
if
the
you don't want to sleep.
Yeah, I'm gonna plan for one and just boom, get it done.
Enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And you're working.
That's the Katie.
Katie's
Yeah.
Katie's.
Yes.
Okay. And I'll try to get.
That would be wonderful.
And I have to tell you, in the Marshall County, I keep in my mind a lot of the Hispanic people from Mexico. Marshall County. When I moved to my house,
He went to a training.
Circle who worked nights at Iowa State in custodial Cuba, and they came to James when Castro took over in the 60s. Anyway, we had a daughter. I had him someplace in the market, and the secretary of school came to my house.
This was good too. A lot of information.
Yes, a lot.
I'm next. I just really nervous about connecting. Do you mind?
Were you born in February? Is that an amethyst?
Oh, no. It's an Iowa geo. They were cutting them at the state fair.
Yeah.
And then they dyed them whatever color you wanted.
Oh, wow.
I know.
That's beautiful.
I thought that was so cool.
That is. Okay, so you
Sorry,
need
I didn't
this?
want to rush you. I
Oh,
just
you're
want to
fine.
make sure my technology.
Do you need this?
I don't think so. I think I need just the plain.
Yep.
Yep.
There you go, right here. I'm
Stronger
sure
hands and
you
better
can
eyes.
do it
No,
just as well. But
no.
I will get that
No,
there
actually not. I have arthritis and I don't have good eyes anymore.
Well, there you go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm just hoping that it comes up on the screen is my main concern.
It was pretty well.
I know.
Yes, there it is.
Yeah.
Anyway, I went and called, and they weren't going to give me.
You know what they need to do with this thing is raise it up just a little bit, don't they? For like.
Sure.
I mean,
Yes, I noticed that.
Then your eye level would be better, wouldn't it?
Just so you know, if you need to adjust volume, it's
okay.
over here.
I don't have any videos, so I think I'm going to be.
And now they're having a first grandbaby, so they tell me that. Yeah.
And then you can just turn it up or down or mute.
Okay, it's just a touch screen. Oh, that's good. Well, she probably presented, so she'll know how to problem solve too. It looks like it came right up.
Oh, yeah.
It did. Cool.
I have
I just got to make sure it doesn't time out. The battery died.
Please come and use you, and he showed me how to do it on there. I have no idea. What is this fancy thing? Oh,